There are family secrets that should die with us, but there are others that need to be told so they never happen again. And mine is the kind that burns the soul until it escapes through the mouth. Can you imagine being locked in a room by your 15 brothers and being paralyzed, not knowing what to do? Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Suzanne Coleman, but everyone around here calls me Miss Susie or Grandma Susie. I'm 78 years old now, born in February of 1946, in a tiny town you've probably never heard of, Pinwood, deep in rural Texas, where the sun cracked the earth and families hid behind tall gates, and even taller silences. I was born in a time when women had no voice, children had no rights, and patriarchs ruled like kings over their little empires. My story is about one of those families that from the outside seemed blessed by God, but inside harbored secrets that still make me wake up in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat. Tell me in the comments which corner of America you're watching this old woman. Tell her memories from, and also, let me know your name, so I know who you are. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel Grandmother's Memories. You don't know how that warms my heart, and gives me strength to share these memories with you. I'm the daughter of Thomas Coleman, a man known in town as a prosperous rancher, owner of lands that stretched as far as the eye could see, and a large family that was the envy of many. To anyone looking from a distance, we were living proof that God blesses those who work hard and respect family. But family, my dears, is sometimes just a pretty word to disguise the greatest horrors that can happen between four walls. My father was a tall man with broad shoulders, calloused hands, and a voice that didn't need to be raised to be obeyed. He had those small, piercing eyes that seemed to see through people, discovering lies even before they were told. He always wore denim shirts, a leather hat, and boots that made noise on the cement floor of the big house, announcing his presence before he appeared. Thomas Coleman wasn't just my father. He was the absolute patriarch of a family that had grown in a very particular way. Besides me, the only girl, there were 15 boys and young men living on our property, whom he called his sons, though not all were truly his sons by blood. It had started when I was still very young. My father had a philosophy about family and responsibility. When one of his brothers was going through hard times, when a cousin was orphaned, when some distant relative had nowhere to leave their male children, Daddy would open the doors of our home. Family helps family, he'd say, and a man who respects himself doesn't let his own blood suffer need. So, over the years, our house filled with boys. There were my 3 legitimate brothers, John, Peter, and Michael, who were children from my father's first marriage. There were the 5 sons he had with my stepmother after me, Anthony, Frank, Joseph, Manuel, and Severino. And there were the 7 cousins who came to live with us at different times, sons of uncles who died, relatives who emigrated, families that fell apart for reasons nobody explained to me well. Our house was immense, built in the style of old ranches, with 3 different wings connected by long hallways and corridors that went all the way around the building. The main wing housed my father and stepmother's rooms, the visiting room, the dining room, and the large kitchen where Miss Connie, our cook, prepared food for almost 20 people every day. In the east wing were the rooms of the older boys. Each room accommodated 2 or 3 of them. That's where the men's conversations happened, the secrets I wasn't allowed to know, the decisions made far from feminine ears. In the west wing were the younger children, always supervised by the older ones, in a rigid hierarchy that Daddy had established from day one. And me? I had my own room in the main wing, very close to my parents' room, as befitted the only girl in the house. A room with an iron bed painted white, a fine wooden wardrobe that had belonged to my grandmother, and a window overlooking the inner courtyard where chickens scratched and where I spent afternoons embroidering or helping Mama with household chores. My stepmother's name was Rose Coleman, a small, delicate woman who had come from Louisiana to marry Daddy when I was barely 2 years old. She was my stepmother, but she never made any difference between me and the children she had later. Rose was a woman of few words, always busy with something, tending to the garden, supervising the cleaning of the house, organizing meals, sewing clothes for that multitude of men, who lived with us. She had small but strong hands that always smelled of coconut soap and lavender water, and a loving way of smoothing my hair when I approached her on quiet afternoons. Mama Rose never talked about the past, never told me what her life had been like before she arrived at our ranch. It was as if she had been born the day she married Daddy, and everything that came before no longer mattered. The routine of our house was like a Swiss clock. Everything worked at the right time. Each person knew exactly their role, and no one dared question the rules Daddy had established. We all woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of the bell he rang in the hallway. The boys would go out to the ranch, work, tend to the cattle, feed the pigs, work in the corn and bean plantation that sustained all those people. I stayed at home with Mama, learning women's work. I helped prepare breakfast for almost 20 people. I washed and ironed the clothes of all those men. I tended to the chickens, watered the garden. It was a hard life, but at the time it seemed normal to me. I didn't know any other way of living. I didn't know there were families different from ours. Daddy controlled everything with an iron hand. He decided what clothes each person would wear, what food would be served, what work each boy would do, what time they could stay awake until. No one left the property without his permission. No one received visitors without him knowing. No one talked too loudly or laughed too hard when he was around. But his control over me was even greater. I couldn't talk alone with any of the boys. I couldn't even go out to the yard without Mama's company. I couldn't wear dresses he considered provocative, which in his mind was anything that showed an ankle or wasn't completely closed at the neck. A decent woman doesn't give cause for gossip, he always said. And my daughter is going to be a decent woman, even if I have to break the legs of anyone who dares to look at her with malice. The boys in the house were of various ages. The oldest, John and Peter, were already over 20 and helped Daddy with the more serious business of the ranch. They were made men, with full beards and rough hands from so much work, whom Daddy treated almost like junior partners. They even had permission to go into town on Saturdays as long as they came back before nightfall and didn't bring bad influences home. The middle ones, which included my legitimate brothers Michael, Anthony, and Frank, were between 15 and 19 years old. They were the loudest, the ones who sometimes tested the limits of Daddy's patience, the ones who dreamed of the day they could leave that property and see the outside world. But they were also the most loyal to Daddy, the ones who most reproduced his behavior and opinions. And the youngest, from 10 to 14 years old, were a mixture of orphaned cousins and my younger brothers. They always lived in fear, always trying to please the older ones, always afraid of doing something wrong that would result in a beating or punishment that could last for weeks. Because Daddy wasn't a man of conversation when someone disobeyed. His correction came in the form of double work, reduced food, or even a good whipping with the leather belt he wore around his waist. Those who don't learn through words, learn through pain, he always said. And everyone in that house knew he meant it. Our property was almost an hour's drive from the town of Pinwood, on a dirt road that turned to mud in the rainy season, and dust in the drought. We were isolated from the world, a complete family living almost as if it were a small country, with its own laws and customs. Daddy liked that isolated life. He said that in town there were too many temptations, too many bad influences, too many people who weren't worth knowing. In here I know what happens, he used to say. I know who comes in, who goes out, what everyone does. In here, my family is protected from the outside world. And it was true, we were protected from the outside world. But no one protected me from the world that existed inside that house, in the dark hallways, in the back rooms, in the heavy silences that fell over all of us, whenever Daddy went out to take care of business in town. Have you ever had that feeling that something terrible was about to happen? That strange weight in your chest, like your body knows something your mind hasn't figured out yet? I've learned to trust that feeling. If only I had understood what it was trying to tell me that Friday in March. It was a Friday in March 1960, right after I had just turned 14, when I discovered that there are different types of protection, and sometimes those who should protect us are exactly who we should fear the most. That Friday in March 1960, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest, as if something in the air had changed during the night. It was the end of summer in Texas, and the heat was already unbearable even in the early morning. Daddy was more serious than usual during breakfast, talking quietly with John and Peter about some business he needed to take care of in town. "I'm going to have to spend the whole afternoon away," he said, stirring his coffee with brown sugar. "I need to talk to Rancher Antonio about selling some head of cattle, and then I need to go to the notary to settle some papers for the deed to the new land." It was a Friday, like so many others. Daddy always went out on Fridays to take care of the week's business, leaving John in charge of the property. But this time, something was different. I felt it in the boys' gazes, in the way they behaved during breakfast, as if they all knew something I didn't know. After we finished eating, Daddy went to get ready. He put on his best white shirt, new denim pants, and leather boots he only wore to go to town. He put brilliant in his hair, put on his hat, and went out to the hallway, where the blue Ford pickup was waiting. "John, you're responsible for everything here," he said, adjusting the keys in his pocket. "Any problem, you solve it, and be careful with the younger boys. I don't want disorder in my absence." What happened after that moment changed my life forever. The sound of the truck's engine starting echoed through the yard like a bell announcing the hour of death. It was a sound I had heard hundreds of times before, but that day it took on a completely different meaning. Daddy accelerated slowly, as he always did, raising a cloud of red dust that took a few minutes to settle. We all stood on the porch watching the truck disappear around the bend in the road. And that's when I noticed how the silence that descended on the house was different from the normal silence. It was a heavy silence, loaded, as if the air had become denser. Mama Rose went into the kitchen without saying a word, and I followed her to help with the breakfast dishes. But while we washed the cups and plates, I felt the boys' looks on my back, as if they were studying me, evaluating me. "Mama, can I go to the yard to take care of the chickens?" I asked when we finished with the dishes. "You can, my child. But don't be long, we're going to make the bread for the week today." I went out to the yard trying to busy myself with the normal tasks of the day. But I couldn't get out of my head the feeling that something was wrong. The boys were walking in small groups, whispering among themselves, stopping talking when I passed by. It was as if a conversation was going on that I couldn't hear. It must have been about 2 hours after Daddy left, when I was in the chicken coop collecting the day's eggs, that Michael appeared at the door. Michael was my blood brother, 3 years older than me, a tall, thin boy who had always been affectionate to me. But that day there was something different in the way he looked at me. "Susie, I need to talk to you," he said in a voice I had never heard from him before. It was a low voice, half hoarse, as if he were nervous. "What's going on, Michael? Did something happen? Come with me, there's something you need to learn." Something in his tone left me frozen inside. I left the basket with the eggs right there on the floor of the chicken coop, and began to walk in the opposite direction from him. "Michael, I don't understand." "Learn what?" "You're 14 now, Susie. You're old enough to know certain things about how women should behave with the men of the family." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I began to run toward the house. But he was faster. He grabbed my arm, not with violence, but with a firmness that made it clear I had no choice. "It's no use running, Susie. Mama Rose is busy in the kitchen, and she's not going to hear you. And even if she did, she knows this is part of your education." "What education? What are you talking about?" "You'll understand when we get there." He took me by the hand, crossing the inner courtyard toward the back of the house, where the rooms of the younger boys were. But instead of entering any of the rooms, he stopped in front of a door that I knew well but rarely opened. It was the room that Daddy used to store old tools, some sacks of corn, and other things that didn't fit in the main storehouse. "Michael, why are we going to the tool room?" "Because that's where the girls in our family learn to become women." He opened the door, and what I saw inside left me breathless. It was no longer a disorganized storage room. Someone had arranged the room, placed an old mattress on the floor, hung a curtain on the only small window. It was as if the room had been specially prepared for something. "Come in, Susie." No, I don't want to go in. It's not a matter of wanting, it's a matter of obeying. That's when other footsteps echoed in the hallway behind us. I turned and saw John approaching with an expression on his face I had never seen before. Behind him came Peter, Anthony, Frank. One by one, all my brothers and cousins appeared, forming a semicircle around the door to the room. John, what's happening? I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I wanted. What's happening is that you're going to learn your place in this family, Susie. You're going to learn to serve the men who take care of you. I don't understand. You don't need to understand now. You just need to obey. It was John who pushed me into the room. It wasn't a violent push, but it was firm enough to make me stumble and fall sitting on the edge of the mattress. The door closed behind me with a dry noise that resonated like a gunshot. I sat there trembling, trying to understand what was happening. From outside I heard low voices, whispers, as if they were organizing something. It was as if there was a plan that everyone knew about, except me. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, the door opened again. This time it was Peter who entered, closing the door behind him. Peter was the second oldest, a young man of 20, strong and quiet, who had always treated me like a little sister, but when he looked at me at that moment, his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a stranger. Susie, you're going to stay quiet and do everything I tell you to. Understand? Peter, I want to get out of here. I want to go back to Mama. Mama Rose knows you're here. She knows what's going to happen. This is part of the education of every girl in this family. What education? I don't understand. You don't need to understand. You just need to obey. That's when I realized there was no escape, that those men I had called brothers all my life had transformed into something completely different, and that room had been specifically prepared for me, for that moment, for something terrible that I still couldn't fully comprehend. Peter approached slowly, and I huddled in the corner of the mattress. My mind was racing, trying to understand how I had ended up in that situation, how the men who should protect me had become my threat. Please, Peter, I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you doing this to me? You didn't do anything wrong. You just reached the right age. That's when he crouched down to my level and firmly held my chin, forcing me to look him in the eyes. Now you're going to learn the first lesson about being a woman in this family. You're going to learn that our word is law, and that you exist to serve us. I tried to get up, tried to run to the door, but he held me easily. It was like trying to flee from a mountain. Peter was twice my size, twice as strong, and was determined to do something that I still couldn't fully understand. Susie, he whispered, as if calming a frightened animal. It will be quick if you don't resist. It will be much worse if you fight. It was at that moment that I understood what was happening. I understood what that room was for. I understood why all the boys were involved. I understood why Mama Rose hadn't come looking for me. It was a ritual, a tradition, something that happened every Friday when Daddy went to town, and I was the new participant in that ritual. Would you still trust your family after something like this? Can you imagine the fear that lived in my heart from that moment on? Little did I know that a ray of hope would come from the most unexpected place. What happened next, in those first minutes, with Peter, was the beginning of my nightmare. I won't describe the details of what he did to me in that room, because some pains are too deep to put into words. But when he finished, when he got up and arranged his clothes as if nothing had happened, I was no longer the same girl who had entered there. Now it's Michael's turn, he said, heading for the door. Remember, if you scream, if you try to run away, it will be worse next time. Much worse. The door opened and closed. Peter went out. Michael came in, and I understood that this was just beginning. One by one they entered that room. Not all 15 at once. Some were too young. Others stood guard to make sure Mama Rose wouldn't come to interrupt us. But there were many, many more than a 14-year-old girl should be able to bear. Between one and the other, I was left alone for a few minutes, lying on that mattress that smelled of mold and sweat, looking at the old wooden ceiling and trying to understand how my life had turned into that hell in a matter of hours. It was during one of those intervals that I got up, trembling, and went to the door. I tried to open it, but it was locked from the outside. I knocked softly, whispering, "Please, let me out. I promise I won't tell anyone. I promise I'll be obedient. Just let me out." From the other side of the door, I heard John's voice. "It's not over yet, Susie. Some are still missing." And that's when I approached the small window and understood why they had put that curtain. It wasn't to darken the room, it was to muffle the sounds, so that even if I screamed, even if I begged for help, no one from outside could hear me. I knelt on the beaten earth floor, and with trembling hands, I took an old towel that was lying in a corner, rolled it up tight, and pushed it into the gap under the door. It was the last piece of hope fading away. I myself was helping to muffle my own screams. "It's to muffle the sounds," I whispered to myself, tears running down my face, "so that no one, not even God, can hear." And that's how I spent that endless Friday afternoon, measuring time not by the hands of a clock, but by the anguish of waiting, waiting for it to end, waiting for the next one to be the last, waiting for the blessed sound of Daddy's truck returning from town, which would mean the end of that torment. When I finally heard the rumble of the Ford engine coming up the dirt road, it was almost night. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple. And I was broken on the floor of that room, without the strength even to cry anymore. The door opened for the last time that day. John came in, helped me to get up, and said in a voice that tried to be kind, "Now you know how things work here. Every Friday, when Daddy leaves, you come to this room. That's how it's always been with the women of this family. That's how it will always be." And what if I tell Daddy? Daddy knows, Susie. Who do you think built this room? Hey, are you really believing what I'm telling you? Tell me in the comments if you had brothers and what your relationship with them was like. I swear I'll read all of them. John's words resonated in my head like a cracked bell. Daddy knows. Who do you think built this room? At that moment, everything I believed about my family, about protection, about love, collapsed like a sandcastle touched by a violent wave. I went back to the main house, staggering, legs weak, mind trying to process what I had just discovered. Mama Rose was in the kitchen preparing dinner as if it were any ordinary day. When she saw me, she just nodded her head and said, "Go wash up and change clothes. Your father will be arriving soon, and we need to have dinner." There was no surprise in her voice. No concern. It was as if she knew exactly where I had spent the afternoon and why. I went to my room like a sleepwalker. I looked in the small mirror that was on top of the dresser, and didn't recognize the person looking back at me. It was still Suzanne, but a different Suzanne. One who knew things she shouldn't know. One who had lost something she could never recover. When Daddy arrived that night, he greeted everyone normally, asked how the day had been, praised the smell of the food that Mama had prepared. During dinner, he talked about business in town, about the price of cattle, about the rain that was late in coming. It was a normal conversation from a normal family, except that nothing was normal for me anymore. I tried to eat, but the food wouldn't go down. I tried to participate in the conversation, but the words wouldn't come out. Daddy looked at me across the table and asked, "Susie, you're quiet today. Did something happen?" It was John who answered, even before I could open my mouth. "She learned some important lessons today, Father. Lessons about responsibility and obedience." Daddy nodded his head in approval. "Very good. A woman only truly becomes one when she learns her place in the world." That night, lying in my bed, looking at the dark ceiling, I began to understand that there was nowhere to run. There was no authority higher than Daddy on that property. There was no law beyond his law. And apparently that law included what had happened to me that afternoon. I spent the entire week living in a strange fog. During the day, I tried to busy myself with normal tasks, helping Mama, tending to the chickens, washing clothes, but my mind always went back to that back room, to John's words, to the terrible certainty that this would repeat the following Friday. The boys behaved differently with me. Now it wasn't open cruelty, but a forced intimacy that gave me chills. A look that lingered too long during breakfast. A hand on my shoulder that stayed too long. Comments with double meaning that only I understood. Michael, my own blood brother, began to treat me as if I were his property. He ordered me to fetch water for him to wash, to make his bed, to speak to him in a tone of authority he had never used before. Susie, come comb my hair, he would say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Susie, go to my room and get my clean shirt. Susie, you forgot to wash my pants. Go wash them now. It was as if after that first Friday, I had become a personal employee to all of them. Not just a sister, but something lesser. Something that existed to serve. Mama Rose observed all of this without saying a word. Sometimes I felt like running to her, crying in her lap, begging her to protect me. But I always remembered her words that afternoon. Go wash up and change clothes. She knew. She always knew and somehow believed it was okay. The second Friday arrived like a death sentence. I woke up that day with an upset stomach. I could barely eat breakfast. I spent the whole morning throwing up from nerves. When Daddy announced he was going out to town, I felt my legs turn to jelly. I have to go to Dallas today, he said, adjusting his hat. I'm going to settle some business with a cattle buyer from there. I might be later than usual. Later than usual. That meant more time in that back room. More time of torment. More time of humiliation. This time, when I heard the sound of the truck moving away, I didn't try to fool myself into thinking that nothing would happen. I knew it would happen. I knew it was inevitable. I knew that this was my life now. This time it was Anthony who came to get me. Anthony, who was 17 years old, and had always been the most cheerful of my brothers. But when he appeared at the kitchen door and said, "Come, Susie," his cheerfulness had disappeared. In its place was something that reminded me of Daddy. A cold, implacable authority. I went with him because I had no choice. I walked through the hallways of the house I had known since I was born, but which now seemed strange, threatening. Each step took me closer to that cursed room that had become the center of my nightmare. This time, when I arrived there, I saw they had made some improvements. They had placed a basin with water and soap in a corner so I could clean myself between one and the other. They had even hung a small mirror on the wall, as if I needed to see myself during that torture. They had even put an old chair where they could sit and wait their turn. You already know how it works, said Anthony, closing the door behind us. I don't need to explain it to you again. And so began my second session in that hell. This time, I knew what to expect. I knew it would be Peter first, then Michael, then the others. I knew it would last for hours. I knew that in the end, I would be broken on the floor, waiting for the sound of Daddy's truck. But there was a difference this second time. During the intervals, when I was left alone in that room, I began to observe the details around me more carefully. I began to study each person who entered, each behavior, each word. I wasn't aware yet, but I was beginning to look for cracks in that wall of cruelty. Have you ever felt that moment when everything changes? When something inside you shifts, and suddenly you're no longer just a victim, but someone who's fighting back in their own quiet way? I didn't know it yet, but my path to freedom was about to begin with the most unexpected ally. It was during the third Friday that I noticed something important. Not everyone participated with the same enthusiasm. Some seemed to be there out of obligation, not by their own will. Some avoided looking me in the eyes. Some trembled almost as much as I did. In particular, I noticed that Charlie, one of the youngest cousins, who was barely 15 years old, always stayed last in line, and when his turn came, he always invented some excuse not to enter. I have a stomachache, he would say. I'm too tired today. I think I heard the sound of a car on the road. The others made fun of him. They called him sensitive, a little girl, but John always ended up letting him pass. Perhaps because he knew Daddy would arrive soon, and it was better not to insist. On the fourth Friday, something changed. Charlie wasn't even in line. When they asked about him, Michael said he was sick, with a fever, in bed. But I knew that wasn't true. I had seen him working in the garden early in the morning, healthy as ever. On the fifth Friday, the same thing. Charlie sick again, and this time, when Frank went to look for him to make sure he was really in his room, he didn't find him anywhere. He must have gone fishing at the creek, John said. But there was irritation in his voice. Leave him. We're already losing too much time. It was on that fifth Friday that I made a decision that would change everything. While I was in that room, suffering what had become my weekly routine of horror, I began to plan. I began to think about Charlie. I began to wonder if he could be the crack I was looking for. Charlie was the son of one of Daddy's uncles who had died in a work accident 3 years earlier. His mother had moved to Houston shortly after, but didn't have the means to take her son with her. Daddy had offered to raise the boy, and everyone thought it was an act of kindness and generosity. But I began to wonder if Charlie saw things the same way. If for him that house was a home or a prison, if he participated in those rituals of his own free will, or out of fear, if he, like me, was looking for a way to escape. During the week that followed, I began to observe Charlie more carefully. I noticed that he always kept more distance from the other boys. I noticed that during meals, he ate in silence, looking at his plate as if he wanted to become invisible. I noticed that at night, when the others stayed on the porch talking and laughing, he disappeared somewhere. One Thursday night, I discovered where he went. I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and as I passed by the hallway window, I saw a small shadow in the yard. It was Charlie, sitting alone under the big oak tree, looking at the stars. There was something in his posture that caught my attention. It wasn't the posture of someone who was just relaxing after a day's work. It was the posture of someone who was suffering. Someone who was lost. Someone who perhaps was looking for answers in the night sky. The following Friday, when Daddy announced he was going to travel to Austin to solve some problems with the documentation of some lands, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. But this time, along with fear, there was something else. There was a plan forming in my head. When John came to get me, as he always did, I went with him without resisting. I entered that cursed room for the 6th time. I lay down on that mattress that I knew so well, and waited. But this time, I was paying attention to who entered and who didn't enter. Peter entered first, as always, then Michael, then Anthony. One by one, they entered and left, using me as if I were an object, as if I had no feelings, as if I weren't human. But as it was getting close to the end, when it was almost 5 in the afternoon and the sun was beginning to set, I noticed that Charlie wasn't in line again. And this time, when Frank went to look for him, he came back with a worried expression. I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked in the room, in the garden, in the corral, at the creek, nothing. Then, forget it, John said irritably. If he doesn't want to participate, it's his problem. When Daddy gets back and finds out he's running away from his responsibilities, let him explain it himself. But I knew Charlie wasn't running away from responsibilities, he was running away from torture. And at that moment, looking at the ceiling of that room where everything bad that had happened in my life had begun, I had the certainty that I had found my crack. Charlie was like me. Charlie was suffering, and maybe, just maybe, he would be willing to help me break that cycle of horror that our life had become. In the week that followed, my life transformed into a careful strategy of observation. I knew I needed to approach Charlie somehow. But I also knew I couldn't be obvious. Any wrong move, any suspicious conversation, John or one of the others might become suspicious and make everything even worse for me. During the days, I continued with my normal obligations, helping Mama Rose in the kitchen, tending to the chickens, washing clothes. But now each task had a double purpose. When I went to get firewood in the backyard, I looked for Charlie. When I hung clothes on the clothesline, I was attentive to his movements. When I helped serve meals, I paid attention to how he behaved with the others. What I discovered was revealing. Charlie was treated by the other boys like a pariah. It wasn't open cruelty, but a sort of subtle contempt that I began to recognize. During meals, he always got the worst piece of meat, the most uncomfortable chair. When they divided tasks, they always gave him the heaviest and most unpleasant work. And when they made jokes or told stories, they never included him. It was as if they tolerated him there, but didn't accept him. As if his presence was an obligation, not a pleasure. And the more I observed, the more I realized this wasn't coincidence. There was something about Charlie that bothered the others, something that made him different from the pack. One Tuesday morning, I finally got my first real opportunity to talk to him. Mama Rose had sent me to the small creek to get water for washing clothes, and when I arrived there, I found Charlie sitting on the bank with his feet in the water, staring into nothing. "Hello, Charlie," I said, lowering the bucket into the water. He startled as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Hello, Susie. Sorry, I was just leaving." "You don't need to leave because of me. The creek is big enough for both of us." He looked at me with a strange expression, as if he wasn't used to kindness coming from someone in the family. We stayed a few minutes in silence, me slowly filling the bucket to buy time, him moving his toes in the water. "Charlie," I finally said, "can I ask you a question?" "I guess. Do you like living here?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at me with wide eyes, as if I had asked him something dangerous. "Why are you asking me that?" "Just curious. It must be hard being away from your mother, isn't it?" It was as if I had touched an open wound. I saw tears forming in his eyes, and he tried to hide them by looking away. "Sometimes I dream that she comes looking for me," he whispered. "But I know it's never going to happen. She doesn't even have money for the bus ticket." "And if you could leave here, would you go?" He looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. "Why are you asking me these things, Susie? No one's going to hear. It's just between the two of us." Charlie remained silent for a long time, as if he were thinking if he could trust me. Finally, his voice came out soft, almost a whisper. "I'd run away. I'd leave today if I could." "Why?" "You know why." And it was at that moment that I understood he knew about the back room, knew about Fridays, knew about the horror I experienced every week. And more importantly, he didn't want to be part of it. "Charlie," I said, my voice trembling with nervousness, You've participated in the things that happen when Daddy travels?" He turned red as a tomato and shook his head vigorously. "John wants me to participate. He says it's part of being a man in this family. But I can't. It's not right, Susie. What they do to you isn't right." I felt a wave of relief, so great that I almost collapsed right there on the bank of the creek. I had found someone who saw the situation the same way I did. Someone who knew that what was happening was wrong. Someone who might be able to help me. "And what do you do when they send you there?" "I hide. I pretend I'm sick. I disappear into the woods. Anything not to have to do that to you." "And they don't get angry?" "Yes. John said if I keep refusing he'll tell your daddy that I'm weak, useless. He said your daddy might throw me out." "And are you afraid of being thrown out?" "I am and not. I'm afraid because I don't know where to go, but also sometimes I think it would be better to be anywhere that's not here." I finished filling the bucket, but I didn't get up to leave. I knew that conversation was too important to be interrupted. "Charlie, if I tell you something, do you promise not to tell anyone?" "I promise." "I'm thinking of a way to get out of this situation, but I can't do it alone. I need someone to help me." He looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. "What kind of help?" "I still don't know exactly, but I know it has to be someone from inside the family, someone who knows the scheme, someone they trust, and who at the same time is someone who doesn't agree with what's happening." "Are you talking about me?" "I am." Charlie remained silent for a long time, nervously moving his hands. I could see he was struggling with himself, weighing the risks, trying to decide if he could trust me. "If they find out we're talking about this," he said finally. "They won't find out. We'll be careful." "And what do you want me to do?" "For now, nothing. I just want to know if I can count on you when the time comes. If when I have a plan, you'll help me execute it." And what would that plan be? I don't know yet, but it has to be something that exposes what they're doing, something that forces Daddy to stop this. Your daddy knows what happened, Susie. He ordered that room to be built. I know, but one thing is for him to know and allow it in secret. Another thing is for it to become public, for other people in town to find out. Daddy cares a lot about his reputation. Charlie nodded slowly. That's true, he would be furious if someone from outside knew. So, will you help me? He took a deep breath as if he were making the most important decision of his life. I'll help you. I can't stand living like this anymore. I can't stand knowing you're suffering, and I'm not doing anything to help. I lifted the heavy water bucket and began to walk back to the house. But before I moved away from the creek, I turned to him one last time. Charlie, from now on, we're going to have to pretend we're just normal cousins. We can't give any sign that we're allies. Agreed. Agreed. But how are we going to communicate? Leave that to me. I'll think of a way. I've been wondering all these years. Have you ever had to be brave like that? Have you ever had to fight against something that seemed too big to defeat? Because what came next would test every bit of courage I had. In the days that followed, Charlie and I developed a discreet system of communication. When I wanted to talk to him, I left a small stone on the kitchen windowsill. When he saw the stone, he knew he should meet me at the creek after dinner. When he wanted to talk to me, he tied a blade of grass on the chicken coop fence. It was risky, but it worked. During those secret conversations, we began to develop a plan. At first, they were just vague ideas, thoughts about how we could expose what was happening. But little by little, the ideas became more concrete, more viable. The inspiration came on a Thursday night, when Daddy came home with something new. He had bought a small tape recorder, the kind that worked with batteries to use in his business. He wanted to record important conversations he had in the city, so he wouldn't forget the details later. It's modern technology coming to the ranch, he said, proudly showing the little device to the whole family. With this, I don't miss any important detail of my negotiations. When I saw that recorder, I immediately knew what our plan would be. It was perfect. It was small enough to be hidden, quiet enough not to be noticed, and powerful enough to clearly capture voices. That night I left the stone on the kitchen windowsill. When I met Charlie at the creek, he saw in my face that something had changed. I have a plan, I said, barely able to contain my excitement. A plan that might work. I explained to him about the recorder, about how we could use it to record what happened in the back room. If we could get a clear recording of the voices, of the orders, of the sounds, we would have irrefutable proof of what was happening. And after we have the recording, he asked, then what? Then you give it to Daddy. You say you discovered it by accident, that you were passing by the room and heard you pretend you were horrified, that you didn't know this was happening. And why would I do that? Why would I turn in my own cousins and brothers? Because you're different from them, Charlie. Because you have a conscience, and because when Daddy hears that recording and realizes that the secret of his family is recorded on a device that can be heard by anyone, he's going to panic. You think he'll stop everything? I think he won't have a choice. His reputation is worth more than anything. If there's a risk that this recording might reach the ears of someone outside the family, he'll do anything to prevent that from happening. Charlie thought for a few minutes, visualizing the plan in his head. When do you want to do it? Next Friday. Daddy said he's going to Austin again, so he'll be late coming back. It will give us enough time to hide the recorder, make the recording, and get it out of there before anyone suspects. And where are we going to hide it? Under that old chair that's in the corner. It's the perfect place. It's close enough to capture everything, but hidden enough that no one will see it. And if they discover the recorder during the things, they won't discover it. They're too focused on what they're doing to pay attention to details, and besides, it's always half dark in there. We left that conversation with our roles well defined. Charlie would be in charge of borrowing the recorder without Daddy noticing. I would be in charge of hiding it in the room at the right moment. And in the end, he would give the recording to Daddy, pretending to have discovered it all by accident. It was a risky plan, full of variables that could go wrong. But it was our only chance to break that cycle of horror that had dominated my life for the last few months. It was our only chance to transform one of the monsters into our ally, using the very power structure of the family to destroy the system that imprisoned me. The following Friday, when Daddy announced he was going to travel to Austin, I felt a mixture of terror and expectation. I knew it would be another afternoon of suffering, but I also knew that perhaps it would be the last. If our plan worked, if we got the recording we needed, everything would change. The recorder was hidden in my underwear, small and warm against my skin. Charlie had managed to take it the night before, when Daddy was distracted talking to Mama Rose about corn prices. When I heard the familiar sound of the truck moving away, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to put our plan into action. When John came to get me that Friday, my heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. The little recorder was hidden in my blouse, warm against my skin, seeming to weigh much more than it really did. Each step toward the back room was a struggle between the terror of what was going to happen and the hope that we might finally have a way out. "Today Daddy's going to be later coming back," John said, as we walked through the hallways, "so we have plenty of time to educate you well." His words chilled my blood, but they also confirmed that our plan had chosen the perfect day. More time meant that the recording would be more complete, more incriminating, more evidence of the horror I lived through every week. When we arrived at the room, I took a deep breath and entered as I always did. But this time I had a mission. While John was closing the door and turning to talk to someone outside, I quickly crouched near the old chair in the corner. With movements I had mentally rehearsed hundreds of times, I took the recorder out of my blouse and pushed it under the chair, turning it on in the same motion. "What are you doing down there?" asked John, turning toward me. "It fell. A button from my blouse fell," I lied, quickly standing up. "I found it." He didn't suspect anything. Why would he? To them, I was just an object, a doll that didn't have thoughts of its own, that wasn't capable of planning anything. That underestimation of theirs was exactly what saved our plan. What happened in the hours that followed was the same horror as always, but this time I endured it, knowing that every cruel word, every humiliating order, every degrading sound was being recorded on that little device hidden in the corner of the room. It was as if I were gathering ammunition for a war I was finally going to be able to fight. Peter entered first, as always. But this time, when he began to talk to me in that tone of authority that I knew so well, I thought of the recorder capturing every word. "Today you're going to learn some new things, Susie. Things that a decent woman needs to know to please a man." Michael came next, and with him came a verbal cruelty that was almost worse than the rest. He liked to humiliate with words, to explain to me exactly what my place was in that family, what my role was as the only woman in the house. "You exist to serve us, Susie. Daddy raised you for that, to be our property, our entertainment." Each word entered the recorder like a confession. Each phrase became evidence of what really happened in that house, that from the outside seemed so blessed by God. One by one they entered and left. Anthony, Frank, Joseph, Severino, some of the older cousins, each leaving their mark of cruelty recorded on that device they didn't even dream existed. The hardest part was when it was Manuel's turn, my younger blood brother, who was barely 16 years old. To see someone I had helped raise, whom I had taken care of when he was little, treating me as if I were less than human, was a pain that cut deeper than any physical wound. "I'm sorry, Susie," he whispered when he entered. "But John said if I don't do this, he'll tell Daddy I'm weak, and you know what Daddy does to those he thinks are weak?" It was the first time anyone had apologized. It was the first time anyone had shown they knew that what they were doing was wrong. And although it was just a small crack in the cruelty, it hurt even more because it showed they knew exactly what they were doing to me. The hours passed as they always passed. Slowly, painfully, marked only by the succession of faces that entered and left that cursed room. But this time, there was something different in the air. There was hope. There was the certainty that this would be the last time. When I finally heard the sound of Daddy's truck coming up the dirt road, it was almost night. The last rays of sun were coming through the small window, painting the room with an orange light that seemed unreal after so many hours of horror. John entered for the last time to give me the usual instructions about keeping the secret, about how I should behave during dinner, about the terrible consequences that awaited me if I dared to tell Daddy anything. Always remember, Susie. Daddy knows this happens. He wants it to be this way. If you try to change things, it will be much worse for you. When he left, I was left alone in the room for a few minutes. I waited to be absolutely certain there was no one nearby. Then I crawled to the chair in the corner and took the recorder. It was warm, still working, still recording. With trembling hands of nervousness and excitement, I turned it off and hid it in my blouse again. I left the room like a shadow. I walked through the empty hallways to my own room and hid the recorder at the bottom of my underwear drawer. It was the evidence we needed. It was our weapon against years of terror. That night, during dinner, I played the same role as always. Quiet girl, submissive, who had spent a quiet afternoon helping Mama Rose with household chores. Daddy told about business in Austin, about the people he had met, about cattle prices, which were better than expected. It was a productive day, he said, cutting the piece of roast beef that Mama had prepared. I settled some important business, made some new contacts. Our family is prospering, thank God. If he only knew what had really happened in that house while he was away, if he only knew that his prosperity was being built on the suffering of his own daughter. But soon he would know, soon he would hear every word, every moan, every cruel order that had been recorded on that little tape hidden in my room. On Saturday morning, I left the stone on the kitchen windowsill. When I met Charlie at the creek after lunch, he immediately saw in my face that the plan had worked. "Did you get it?" he asked, barely able to contain his anxiety. "I got it. It's all recorded. Every word, every voice, every horrible thing they said." I took the recorder out of my blouse and put it in his hand. It seemed too small to carry so much weight, so much evidence, so much power of change. "And now you do your part. You go see Daddy tomorrow morning, very early, before he leaves for work. You'll tell him you found this lying in the yard, that you were curious and decided to listen to it. You'll pretend you were horrified by what you heard. And what if he's suspicious of me? If it seems strange to him that I found precisely this? He won't be suspicious. You're just an orphaned cousin who lives here out of charity. To him you don't have the value or intelligence to plan something like this." Charlie put the recorder in his pants pocket, but there was doubt in his eyes. "Susie, what if this doesn't work? What if instead of stopping everything, he gets even more furious?" "It will work," I said with a conviction that I didn't know where it came from. "It will work because the only thing Daddy loves more than power over this family is his reputation out there. And if he knows there's a recording of these things circulating, he'll do anything to protect his name. And after I give it to him, what's going to happen to me? You'll be the hero of the story. You'll be the brave boy who discovered something terrible and had the courage to tell the authority of the family. Daddy will see you with different eyes. And what about you? What will happen to you?" That was the question I didn't want to ask myself. I didn't know what Daddy would do to me when he discovered I had orchestrated that plan. I didn't know if he would see me as a victim or as a traitor, but I knew that anything would be better than continuing to live that hell every Friday. "I'll be fine," I lied. "The important thing is that this ends forever." Sunday morning arrived like a different dawn. I woke up knowing that by the end of that day my life would have completely changed. Either for better, if our plan worked, or for much worse if it failed. During breakfast, I discreetly observed Charlie. He was nervous, moving his food around, avoiding looking directly at anyone. But when our eyes met for a second, I saw determination there. He was going to fulfill his part. After breakfast, when Daddy went out to the porch to have a small coffee and read an old newspaper he had brought from town, Charlie got up from the table with a solemn expression. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Can I talk to you? It's about something important I discovered." Daddy raised his eyes from the newspaper, surprised. Charlie rarely spoke to him directly. Rarely took any initiative at all. "What is it, boy? Speak up." "It's better if we talk in private, sir. It's a serious matter." Daddy closed the newspaper and looked at Charlie more attentively. There was something in the boy's tone that had awakened his curiosity. "Then come in here. We'll talk in my office." They went into the house, and I stayed on the porch, pretending I was interested in feeding the chickens, but with all my senses concentrated on trying to hear what was happening inside. Daddy's office was at the back of the house, but I still managed to hear some fragments of the conversation. Charlie's nervous voice, explaining how he had found the recorder. Daddy's voice, first irritated, then concerned, and then the silence. A silence that lasted almost half an hour. A silence during which I knew Daddy was listening to that recording, listening to the voices of his own sons and nephews, confessing the crimes they committed every Friday in the back room. When the voices returned, they were different. Daddy's voice was lower, more controlled, more loaded with a fury that I could feel even from afar. Charlie's voice was even more nervous, but also relieved, as if the most difficult weight had been lifted from his shoulders. After a few more minutes, I heard heavy footsteps approaching. Daddy came out of the office with an expression on his face I had never seen before. It wasn't common anger. It was the expression of a man who had discovered that his empire was built on a secret that could destroy it. Behind him came Charlie, pale, but determined. When our eyes met, he made an almost imperceptible sign with his head. It had worked. Daddy had heard everything, and now was the moment to see what he would do with that information. "John!" Daddy shouted with a voice that made the whole house tremble. "Come here now!" And that's how the end of our nightmare began, with a shout of fury from a patriarch who had discovered that his absolute authority had been challenged, recorded, and transformed into evidence that could destroy everything he had built. John appeared running from the east wing of the house, with his shirt half open, and his hair disheveled, as if he had just woken up from a nap. When he saw the expression on Daddy's face, his face completely changed. It was like seeing a boy transforming into an adult in a matter of seconds, realizing that something very serious was happening. "What is it, Daddy? Did something happen?" Daddy didn't respond immediately. He stood looking at John with those small, piercing eyes, as if he were seeing for the first time who that man he had raised really was. The silence extended for so long that even the little birds in the yard seemed to stop singing. "Get into the office," Daddy finally said, with a low voice that was much more terrifying than any shout. "And call Peter, Michael, Anthony, Frank. Call all of them, now." John tried to ask some question, but Daddy's look silenced him instantly. He ran off to find the others, and in a few minutes the whole house was in an uproar. The boys were arriving one by one, all with faces of people who didn't understand what was happening, but knew it was serious. I stayed on the porch pretending to feed the chickens, but paying attention to every movement. Charlie had disappeared. He had probably hidden in his room to not appear suspicious. Mama Rose appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on her apron, with that worried expression she always had when Daddy got too serious. "Susie, come inside," she said softly. "When your father gets like this, it's better we're not in the way." But I didn't want to miss anything. This was the moment I had dreamed of for months. Finally, Daddy was going to discover the truth about what happened in his house. When he went out, finally, someone with authority was going to confront those monsters who hid behind smiles of protective brothers. "Can you go, Mama? I'll be right there." She looked at me strangely but went into the house. Mama Rose always knew how to stay out of men's business, even when that business involved her daughter. From the office, voices began to come out, first low, then louder. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was becoming increasingly tense. Daddy spoke for long periods, and then came short, nervous responses from the boys. Suddenly, I heard a dry noise, as if someone had hit their hand hard on the table. Then, the loudest shout I had ever heard from Daddy in my whole life. "Liars, all of you, liars and scoundrels." The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the shout. It was as if the entire house were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then the real argument began. Voices rising, people talking at the same time, Daddy shouting orders that I couldn't understand well. I heard my name being mentioned several times, always followed by curses and accusations that made me understand they knew they had been discovered. The office door opened with such force that it hit the wall. John came out first with a red face and frightened eyes. Behind him came Peter and Michael, also with faces of men who had just received the reprimand of their lives. Not physical but of words that cut deeper than any belt. Daddy appeared at the office door, holding the recorder in his hand, as if it were a weapon. His voice resonated throughout the house. Now you're going to learn what happens when someone dishonors the name of this family. What happened next was something I had never seen before. Daddy, the man who had always controlled everything with calm and silent authority, completely lost control. But it wasn't a casual loss of control. It was a calculated, planned, devastating fury. He called all the boys to the central yard of the house. One by one the 15 appeared, including Charlie, who came out of his room, trying to appear confused about what was happening. Mama Rose and I stayed on the porch, observing from afar, but Daddy made sure we were present. Susie, come here, he said, pointing to a place beside him. You're going to witness this. When I approached, I saw that Daddy was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it was making his body vibrate like a guitar string. He raised the recorder so everyone could see it. Do you know what's in here? He asked, his voice coming out low but cutting like a knife. It's your voices. It's every dirty word that came out of your mouths. It's the proof that my own sons became animals without my permission. John tried to say something, but Daddy cut him off with a look that could kill. Shut up. You'll speak when I order you to. Daddy began to walk back and forth in front of those men, like a general inspecting soldiers who had committed treason. Each step of his resonated on the cement floor like a death sentence. Did you think I was an idiot? He asked. That you could do whatever you wanted in my house with my daughter behind my back, and I would never find out? Daddy, can we explain? Michael tried. Explain what? Daddy's shout was so loud that even the neighborhood dogs began to bark. Are you going to explain how you turned my daughter into a... I couldn't finish the sentence. For a moment, I thought he was going to cry, but instead of tears, what came was more rage. You have dishonored this family, he said now, speaking low again, which was even more terrifying. You have dishonored my name. You have dishonored the name of your ancestors. And worst of all, you did it behind my back like miserable criminals. It was then that I understood what the real issue was for Daddy. It wasn't what they had done to me. It was the fact that they had done it without his authorization. It was the disobedience, not the crime. It was the lack of respect for his authority, not the suffering they had caused me. John, Daddy said, pointing to his oldest son, you were responsible for this house in my absence. It was your obligation to maintain order and decency. Instead, you organized this. John tried to defend himself. Daddy, I thought you knew it was normal. Normal? Daddy took 2 steps toward John, and the 22-year-old man backed away as if he were a 5-year-old child. Normal is respecting the rules of the house. Normal is asking permission. Normal is maintaining the dignity of the family. Then Daddy turned to all the others and made the announcement that changed everything. From today on, things are going to be different in this house. Very different. He began with the immediate punishments. John lost all the privileges of oldest son. He could no longer go to town on Saturdays. He could no longer make decisions about the ranch. He could no longer give orders to anyone. Peter received the same treatment. Michael, Anthony, and Frank were demoted to simple workers, with no right to an opinion on anything. You'll work from sun up to sundown, Daddy said. You'll eat after everyone else. You'll sleep on the floor if necessary. You're going to learn what respect is the hard way. But the greatest punishment came after. And there's one more thing. You will never speak a word to Susie again. You will never look at her. You will never breathe the same air as her if I can help it. Daddy turned to me. And for the first time since everything had begun months ago, I saw something resembling affection in his eyes. It wasn't exactly paternal love, but at least it was recognition that I existed as a person, not just as property. Susie, you're going to have a new room in the main wing, next to ours. You'll have a key, you'll have privacy. And if any of these scoundrels comes near you, you can come tell me, and I'll break his neck. Then he did something that completely surprised me. He turned to Charlie and said, Charlie, you did the right thing. You showed you have character when all the others showed they are worthless. From today on, you are my right hand. You'll help me maintain order in this house. Charlie turned red and just nodded his head. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw he was as surprised as I was with the turn of events. Daddy wasn't finished. He turned to the others and made the final announcement. He went to the back room, that cursed room that had been the center of my nightmare for so many months, and came back with a can of kerosene. You're going to burn this room, he said. You're going to burn everything in it, the mattress, the chair, everything, and then you're going to tear down the walls until they're dust. Witnessing the burning of the room was like seeing my nightmare burning too. The flames licked the walls where I had suffered so much, consuming every bad memory, every moment of terror. When everything turned to ashes, I felt as if a part of my soul had finally been freed. But Daddy still wasn't done with the changes. In the days that followed, he completely restructured the hierarchy of the house. The boys who had participated in what he called conspiracy against the family were all demoted. Some of the younger cousins who hadn't participated because they were too young were promoted to positions of trust. The family dynamic changed radically. During meals, there was a heavy silence. John, Peter, and Michael ate with their heads down, like ashamed dogs. Charlie sat next to Daddy, receiving guidance about the ranch work, and I could finally eat in peace without feeling predatory looks on me. Mama Rose never commented on what had happened. It was as if she had woken up one day and discovered that the rules of the house had changed overnight, and she had simply accepted the new reality. Perhaps she always knew that someday things would explode. Perhaps she was even relieved. The most impressive thing was seeing how Daddy took total control of the situation. He not only punished the guilty, he rebuilt the entire family system so that something like this could never happen again. He established new rules, new schedules, new supervision. It was as if he had realized that his empire had almost collapsed because of his absence, and now he was determined never to leave the house again without being absolutely certain that everything was under control. For me, it was like being reborn. For the first time in months, I could walk around the house without fear. I could sleep without having nightmares. I could wake up on Fridays without feeling terror in my stomach. The sound of Daddy's truck leaving was no longer the signal of my hell. It was just the sound of a car leaving. Charlie became my silent protector. We never openly talked about what we had done together, but there was an understanding between us. He had risked everything to help me, and that had changed not only my life but also his. From a rejected orphaned cousin, he became Daddy's person of trust, the new one responsible for the order of the house. Years later, when I got married and left the ranch, Daddy never again allowed so many men to live under the same roof. Charlie told me he had become much more rigorous with everyone, much more present, much more controlling. It was as if he had learned that delegating authority was too dangerous. John, Peter, and Michael never fully recovered from the humiliation. They continued living on the ranch, working as employees of their own father, but never again having the trust or respect they had before. It was a punishment that lasted for the rest of their lives. Today, looking back, I understand that our victory wasn't perfect. Daddy didn't stop what was happening because he understood it was wrong. He stopped because he discovered he was being betrayed, but the end result was the same. I was freed from a hell that seemed to have no end. The strength I found to plan and execute that plan changed who I was forever. I discovered that even in the most desperate situation, there's always a crack in the wall. There's always an unexpected ally. There's always a way to transform the very structure that oppresses us into a weapon for our liberation. My dears, congratulations for having listened to me this far. Nowadays, people can't listen to someone speak for more than a few seconds. So if you've reached this point, thank you very much. To know who are the dear ones who are really with me here, comment the word kindness. If this story moved you in some way, if it brought you some kind of reflection or hope, I ask from the bottom of my heart that you like this video and subscribe to our channel Grandmother's Memories. You don't know how that gives me strength to continue sharing these memories that are so difficult, but that can help other people who are going through similar situations. Because life teaches us that there is always a way out. There is always hope. There is always a way to break the chains that bind us. Sometimes that strength comes from within us. Sometimes it comes from an unexpected ally. But it always exists. The important thing is to never stop looking for it. Thank you for accompanying me on this painful but necessary journey. Always remember, you are stronger than you imagine. And no matter how dark the situation may seem, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel waiting to guide you toward freedom.